to our current election law.
All right. My name is Mary Carole Cooney. That's a double first name. And I am the chairperson of the Fulton County Board of Elections. I have served in that capacity for just shy of 7 years, and this is my second presidential election that I have conducted as chairperson. I do not have any firsthand knowledge, that is to say, things that happened to me or that I have personally witnessed comparable to the other speakers that I have heard within the last hour. So there are two things I could tell you, and you can tell me if you are interested in either of them. And one of them is what my board is doing or prepared to do about similar complaints that have, and other observations that have been made to us in this morning at our monthly election board meeting and in the recent past. I can tell you about that. And I can also give you a reason why I'm not going to be very satisfactory, but what I think we have to keep in mind about what fixes to make to the system. Now, I will assume you will just let me speak. So,
yes, ma'am.
Cut me right out.
Yes, ma'am.
I listened to our own public comments this morning, and I read many emails that we also received concerning the conduct of the November 3rd elections. I read and heard concerns about alleged illegalities, lax practices, insecurity of ballots, and some specific things like suitcases of ballots hidden under tables, water leaks, counting ballots without partisan party observers being present, and lawsuits that have been filed. We take those seriously. I take them seriously. What can we do? We want to know what was wrong or lax or negligent, and at least ensure that going forward, these things are fixed and will not be repeated. But what we need to do in reviewing what happened that was bad is to review it well. A fundamental principle of investigations and of democratic government is that you don't investigate yourselves. What you get if you do that is what's called measurement bias. The person taking the measurement has a bias one way or another, and it does not do well for an impartial conclusion. A local government agency is not authorized or compelled by law to issue subpoenas, compel testimonies, cross-examine witnesses, issue rulings, or impose penalties. The Secretary of State's office is. Routinely, after any election, the Secretary of State notifies my board of alleged misfeasance, nonfeasance, or neglect. We appear before them and we either enter into a consent order or tell them that we want to have a trial. We do not have the authority or resources, and we certainly have nobody on our staff who is designated as an investigator to do what would be required to do it well. I'm reluctant to undertake what cannot be done well. Given this determination by me, I made inquiries of the Secretary of State's office and spoke with their chief investigator, as well as with members of our staff who have been questioned by either the Secretary of State's office or the GBI. In speaking with the Secretary of State's office, I learned that they are conducting 250 investigations right now, only a very small portion of which pertain to Fulton County. I asked specific questions about specific complaints brought to my attention and allegations made, and I was told as to each of them that they were under active investigation. This is where it should be. Moreover, I am informed that they are nearing the end of what they need to do, although I am not putting any deadlines on them. So I think that we are being investigated. We are being investigated by the entity that has that power and authority. And I will also tell you, based on the discussion among members of my board, that this should and will not be where the matter rests. my board put me on notice this morning that whatever happens will be immediately shared with the board, and we will make up our minds as to what we need to do. We want the, I also, as board chairman, at the end of the year, think about what our board needs to do better in the coming year. And I thought about undertaking that discussion. And at this year's end, I came up with a couple of things that will make us perform better. One is to have elections without brand new voting infrastructure and software, which is what we had this year and with which we had considerable difficulties. I would want us to have elections without a pandemic. This really was an obstacle for us. You may have heard that we actually had staff members die, and yet their compatriots went right back to our offices and kept working. Nonetheless, it very much slowed us down. We would like elections without 100,000 voters deciding to use absentee ballots for the first time, as facilitated by the state, but not facilitated and not put into place with any time or prior planning by us. All of these things would make elections better. There are things that you have heard, and I'm sure you will hear about illegalities, but I would ask you to consider the obstacles under which we operated and whether those obstacles can be alleviated in the coming year by some time to put procedures into place. That's it.
Thank you, Ms. Cooney. Do you mind if we take we take a couple questions?
Sure.
Chairman Powell, do you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have a question of this person testifying, but I would like to make a comment before we finish the day.
Yes, sir. We'll allow the committee members to enter some comments in before we adjourn. I know Secretary Williamson, you had a question? You're muted, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Carole Cooney, thank you for your testimony. Mine's a very simple question. Would you have any objection at all to having bipartisan signature observers for the signature verifications on the inbound ballots in the upcoming election as requested by many members of the General Assembly?
By bipartisan observers, I assume you are meaning two observers.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. We discussed that this morning. Easier said than done. Definite problems with getting it done for the January 5th election, and that comes down to money, time, and space. We will need to have twice as many observers as we have had in the last election. We will need to find them, put them in place, and we will need to ensure that they have enough space in the places that we have set up to do so. Now, do I know the answers as to whether those obstacles can be overcome? I do not, but I do know that they are real obstacles, and we need, well, as I said, I have a bias, and it is that if I'm going to undertake something, I want it done well. And it is not 100% certain at this time that we can do this in the near term.
Do you have any objection at all into at least exploring that? Do you have any philosophical objection?
It is being done as we speak. This was why I could not appear earlier. It was the subject of our discussion this morning.
So you support the concept as long as the money and time and adequate spacing is available?
I don't know why not at this time. But as with everything, I would like to have it in front of me. But we seriously discussed that, and there are several members of our board who really want to move forward with it, and I support them.
Thank you.
Representative Jones had a question, and then we'll move on to Mr. Favorito.
Thank you, Chairman Blackman. Ma'am, thank you so much for your candor. It's actually highly appreciated. Your demeanor could have been completely different, but instead you were very open. So I thank you for that. My question is this: as this committee is reflecting on November 3rd, thinking about January 5th to Representative Williamson's question, and then also getting prepared to see what we should be doing to get prepared for 2022, given the fact that you head up the largest county within the state of Georgia, do you look at other states, other counties that are in similar size, similar demographics, and see who is basically doing the best practice to see what you could possibly bring to Fulton and maybe even recommend to the entire state? Or is that something that isn't necessarily done within your purview?
It is not necessarily done within our purview. We have looked at agencies from other states, and let me tell you what I mean. The business of absentee by mail is actually pretty new to Georgia. I have discovered that it is really in the western states that those have been put into practice, places like Utah and Colorado. I have not spoken with the heads of local county election boards in those states or in others out west, but I have spoken to persons who have undertaken that function. And one of them, actually several of them, have said to me that it takes years to have a good absentee by mail function in place. And we have listened to them. Whether we accept what they say, we have not done yet, because we were, as I said a little bit earlier, kind of thrown into it in the middle. But we have spoken to them. When we hired our present elections director, I also became aware, he was from Texas. We seem to be looking to people from the West. I found that in different regions of the country, there are different systems in place. And we hired him because at that time, Fulton County and the state had hardly any early voting. So we addressed early voting. I think we've got some great early voting this time. We are going to have 30 early voting locations on before the January 5th election, plus buses, which you may have heard of, RVs to go where there's a specific need, plus outreach places. We're going to have 38 drop boxes. We're going to cover that. But there are other things that we don't have. We are aware. I told my husband this would happen, and I am sorry. And we do know some things, but not anything I can tell you definitively or conclusively that we have learned that we will adopt. We only know them.
Thank you. And if I could just ask, notwithstanding the K-9, and you don't need to answer an email to the chairman, would be perfectly fine. But what I'd love to get is just a very quick answer to these two things. One, you just mentioned 35 plus boxes. Are they all being under video surveillance? And two, could you please ask Fulton's attorneys under which part of the code section are the buses authorized? And if you could just get that, again, I don't want to take too much time, Mr.
Easy
Chairman.
answer to the second one. I don't know how the two outreach buses are authorized. Really, outreach RVs, they're very big. For
RVs.
the first question about the drop boxes, there are 38 of those, and those are authorized under Rule 183-1-14-0.6-14 of the State Election Board rules, which is entitled Secure Absentee Ballot Drop Boxes, which lays it all out for us.
Correct. I appreciate that. And if you could send that, I'm fully aware of that section. And if you could send things to the chairman, I would appreciate it. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you. Ms. Cooney, is that right, though? It's a mobile polling location?
It is a mobile polling location, and we have two of them, and we can use them for we have two things in mind. One is if there is an emergency, and we do have emergencies. We do have sewer backups in polling places, things like that. We can dispatch a bus there so that people can vote instead of simply being turned away. And also, if we are aware of very long lines, we can dispatch one of those RVs. I have not actually voted in one, but I've seen one in operation at Morningside Baptist Church in Midtown, and it was functioning beautifully prior to the November election.
Representative Wynn and Representative Oliver have asked to ask questions. Representative Wynn, you had a question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Cooney, I was just going to ask, there are a lot of allegations that were made about Fulton County elections, both in testimony in this committee today and you know, all over the news cycle. So would you be willing to send the members of the committee in writing just the response that Fulton County has in regards to those specific allegations? You named some of them today, the water break, the disruption of counting of the ballots. But specifically, if you're able to answer one question for me today, one of the allegations is there were truckloads of fake ballots that were added to Fulton County's election result. Can you respond to that allegation specifically?
I just spoke to you about my reluctance to do so when somebody with credentials has undertaken that. And I know that specific question is under investigation by the Secretary of State's office. I think that it is nearing conclusion. I will find out where it is. But the thing about the Secretary of State's office that is better situated than us is their ability to identify and talk to a number of witnesses, to review videotape, which may or may not have been doctored, and come to conclusions, which we simply do not. But I will get you an answer to that. I hope that is sufficient.
Thank you.
Representative Oliver.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want my friends on the committee to know that Mary Carole Cooney has a long civic career, president of the League of Women Voters, senior counsel to the city of Atlanta for decades. Mary Carole, you're aware that there's an existing court order on review of exact match signatures. And as a lawyer with a whole lot more skill than I, you would recognize that we could not change the terms of that existing court order in any way.
That is correct.
So the discussion about exact match signatures reviews really can't go forward until that court order is somehow amended, which of course cannot happen before January 5th. Secondly, changing the rules about review of exact match signatures would create a different set of circumstances for some voters than other voters, an equal protection argument that you would be nervous about, I'm sure, if the rules were changed.
I think that's called leading the witness, but I will accept that. No, I think that is correct. And let me, I made a notation when Representative Jones said we're here on November the 3rd talking about an election on January the 5th. No, we're here on December the 10th talking about an election that starts on December the 14th. In terms of what we can do to change things, that is not very much at this date. We would certainly want to have all of our staff trained to do whatever a court or any other entity with authority like the State Election Board has told us to do. And I will say, having received some last minute orders or rules, that it is very difficult for us to get to the entirety, and sometimes as many as 2,000 employees, to get the word to them in time to make a meaningful difference. So we appreciate I appreciate our looking at a horizon other than January the 5th.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I would imagine we'd probably have more questions for you at some point, Ms. Cooney, but our time is short and have some interest in the county there in which you chair. So thank you for being on with us. Mr. Favorito, you and